All right, hi everybody. Welcome to today's event. I'm Jason Gumpert from MS Dynamics World, and I'm pleased to be able to host yet another of our Portals community calls with Nick Haydick from Engineered Code, as well as his colleague Paul Fuchs. And as we get started, please do know that we do take your questions on these events. We're also recording it in case you have to leave early. We will be sharing that with you as well. Look for the questions block in the webcast controls. You can enter those at any time, and I believe Nick and Paul will be making time near the end to take any of those. Trying to think if there's anything else. No, I think with that we are ready to get started. So Nick, I'm going to hand things off to you.
Thank you very much. All right. So I hope everyone's staying safe out there. I know that different parts of the world we're dealing with different levels of the pandemic. So I hope wherever you are, you're staying socially or physically distant and keeping safe. So today's call, I'm excited to talk about advanced developer techniques. And especially the fact that I can share a few more details that haven't been really previously released to the community about the CRUD API that we've all been waiting for so many years, and the details that were not really included in the announcement of the feature back when those came out, I think near the beginning of the year. So I'm going to be talking about, a little bit about JavaScript. I'm going to be talking about companion apps, and I'll be talking about, that CRUD API. So today is an exciting session. So, moving along here. So, quick introduction. If you don't know who I am, my name is Nicholas Hayduke. I'm the president and a software engineer with Engineered Code Consulting Inc., business applications MVP. And I've been working with Power Apps Portals since they began. They were birthed at ADX Studio more than 10 years ago. So that is what I do. I live and breathe Portals on a day-to-day basis. So, and I appreciate you guys taking some time out of your day to join with me and learn more about Power Apps Portals. If you want to connect with me on social media, you've got my LinkedIn there. Please do that. You got Twitter, you got my blog, we've got my YouTube channel, all those things. Please reach out if you ever have any questions on Portals. I'm always happy to chat anything kind of Power Platform related. And shout out to the good folks at MS Dynamics World, Jason Gumpert specifically, for helping me hosting with the GoToWebinar software and just coordinate everything, getting the word out there. So appreciate their help with getting this initiative going. So again, in terms of the agenda, similar agenda to the previous months, we've got the Portals news that we'll go over. We'll then kind of deep dive into today's topic, which is the advanced developer techniques. We'll then talk about when the next time that we'll have one of these Portals community calls, and then if there's time remaining, we can have some Q&A. I do my best to try and leave as much time for Q&A as possible. So, and if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to drop it into the questions area. I'll kind of deal with those as they come up. If I notice if it's something that Paul can handle, he'll answer as well. So feel free to drop questions in the questions area. All right, so let's talk about what we've got in terms of Portals news over the last month. So I'm not sure if you've noticed or not, but there was a YouTube video that Microsoft put out. I think it's about 8 minutes-ish, where they kind of give an overview of the 2020 Release Wave 1 features. And so what's exciting, what's new since we last got together a month ago is that some of the features that were announced as part of the 2020 Release Wave 1 are now available, and we'll talk about those in just a second. But so that video that I've linked there, you can see kind of an overview of some of those features. Another thing to note that, and I don't know how commonly known this is, but some of these features which are listed in preview, if you just go to make.powerapps.com and you're kind of going through your traditional admin experience, you may not see them. So what you need to do is you need to go through to make.preview.powerapps.com to get access to some of these additional features. So obviously anything in preview is, maybe there's bugs, there's still work to be done. But I know a lot of people who use the preview maker experience exclusively because there is so much kind of new happening. It seems like every day there's something new. They're fixing bugs. Everything's, all the latest stuff is in that preview. So I know some people that don't even bother with the GA one, and they're just using the make. .preview.powerapps.com. So something to consider anyways. But when you see something marked as preview and you look and you can't find it, a good chance that it might be available in the make.preview. So in terms of the features that I've seen actually get lit up, so one of these would be the additional entities search. So this, when Portals was first introduced from Microsoft, there was kind of a limited subset of the out-of-the-box entities that could be searched using the global search. So that would be things like web pages, knowledge base article, blogs, forums. There was just a certain list of entities that could be searched. And one of the things that Microsoft announced was that you could now configure your own custom entities to be included in that search index, and that functionality is now available. As far as I know, that is generally available. So it's not even in preview. That functionality is available. You'll see the link here that I've got on the screen there. That's the documentation for this feature. It's pretty straightforward to configure. It's really just a bunch of, a handful of site settings that you go in there and say, hey, this entity can be enabled for search. There's a site marker you set up to define the kind of the details page for that particular entity. It's something I got an opportunity to play with probably about a month ago. And it was pretty straightforward to set up and very good to use. What's really cool about this is that for Power Apps portals, and if you're using a template the starter template that doesn't depend on, doesn't have any of the dynamics modules, so it doesn't have knowledge base, it doesn't have the community forums, all those types of things. The search for the kind of the starter template was pretty, I don't want to say useless, but all you could do was search web pages, and there wasn't a lot to it, right? Most people were building out custom web applications. They want to search custom entities. So now we've got a true search that we can use in the starter template. So that's a really cool feature. Another feature that's in preview, so you do have to go to make.preview.powerapps.com to see it, but it's the theming. So this is the ability to, whereas before, what you could do is you could upload a complete Bootstrap theme to replace to update the colors and the fonts and all that sort of stuff. And again, that is completely supported still. But what they've introduced is kind of a basic theme editor that doesn't require you to upload a new file or anything like that. You can essentially go in. There's a few pre-built themes, but in addition to the pre-built themes, you can go in there and kind of change some colors yourself. So there's a basic theme editor that requires, it's very simple to use, very targeted at the citizen developer community for just changing a few colors on your portal. So I know the product team is very excited about that, so you can go ahead and check that out and provide your feedback. The other thing that's available in preview is the simplified portal identity provider configuration. So what that is for configuring what authentication providers are enabled on your portal. In the past was a setup that involved a lot of magic strings and site settings and setting up all these different things. Now what you can do is you can set up that your portal identity providers through make.powerapps.com without touching a site setting. And so this just really simplifies the experience for setting up those identity providers. It helps with things like Azure AD B2C. Now you still have to you still have to do the configuration on, say, if you're setting up Facebook or you're setting up Azure AD B2C, you still have to do all the configuration on the other side. But rather than dealing with site settings and maybe getting the name wrong or missing a setting, they've really simplified the way that you can do that in the in Power Apps portals on the Power Apps portal side of things. So you don't necessarily have to go into the model-driven app in order to set up your authentication anymore. So that's really cool. The other one is the Power BI in the Portal Studio. So this isn't any, say, new Power BI functionality, but whereas before you had to start getting into liquid code, now you can directly within the Portal Studio, which is the new kind of drag and drop WYSIWYG, similar to kind of same look and feel as the Canvas app type experience. You can now, there's a component where you can just drag and drop a Power BI component onto your screen. It will give you options in terms of which report or which dashboards you want to show. It will tell you if you maybe haven't enabled Power BI yet on your portal. So it kind of steps you through that process. So again, very much targeted at the citizen developer to get you quickly and easily getting Power BI added to your portal. So that's the reason I put GA question mark here is that it was available on just make.powerapps.com. It didn't have to go to the preview, but according to the documentation, it's in preview. So to be honest, I'm not sure whether it's preview or GA, but it is available in make.powerapps.com. So those are the 4 that I've found that are actually available. Obviously, when they talk about the release wave 1, it kind of can go from any time from April all the way to end of September. So that there are more features coming, and of course, we're going to talk about the CRUD API. So there are more coming, but these are the ones that I've noticed that have lit up and you can actually see and go play with today. So go ahead and spin up a trial and give it a try. The other little bit of portals news, maybe not so much news, but something, an initiative that I'm going to start kind of pushing here, is just asking everyone, there's two forums now for where people where people are asking a lot of portals questions, and I'm really trying to encourage people to move over to for there to be a single forum. And so the best place, if you ever have questions on portals, the best place to put your questions is on the Power Users community forums, as opposed to the community.dynamics.com. Now that portals is a feature of the Power Platform, the Dynamics side of it is it's not as it's more, again, it's a part of the Power Platform. So we should be using the powerusers.microsoft.com, and it's all great for me to say, hey, use this one, but there's actually pretty significant benefit for you to use that. The actual portals product team is extremely active answering questions on that forum. I don't know if I've ever seen them answer a question on the community.dynamics.com, but they are very active, and there are resources kind of dedicated to answering the questions on Power Users. So not only do you get the answers quicker, but you'll also, what I notice is a lot of people kind of cross post. They'll put their question on both, and I've run into this a few times where I see a question on the Power Users. I go in and maybe I put an answer, and then I check and I see they put the exact same question on the community.dynamics.com, and someone else has already answered it over there. So as much as I love spending time answering questions that have already been answered, but it's nice to avoid that duplicate and just kind of have a single place where you're asking your portals questions. Now I know we kind of run into these kind of there's kind of this weird line of, if you have a question that's maybe specific about the partner portal, well, yes, I guess the partner portal would probably still fall under community.dynamics.com, because that is a feature that you only get if you are using Dynamics. However, I can't even think of one example where someone was asking something that was really specific to Dynamics. It wasn't more of just a generic Power Apps portals question. So I really encourage you to use the powerusers.microsoft.com and use the Power Apps portals specific discussion area for that, because you're going to get your answers quicker. I'm only going to be kind of actively monitoring the powerusers.microsoft.com one going forward, just because, like I said, there seems to be so much duplication, and I really would like to see that get moved over and everyone using that. So if you can do me a favor and start using that, that would be fantastic. All right. Just checking the questions here. It says simplified portal identity will automatically erase existing configuration for existing portals. I don't believe so. To be honest, I haven't played with it enough to say for sure, but my understanding is that it's still just it's still saving everything in site settings. It's really just another UI for the site settings to create those site settings. So whatever site settings you already have there should be kind of read in by that area. That's my guess. So I don't think there's really any conflict. It's just a different UI to edit your portal your portal identity settings. So I don't think that there's really a conflict there. It's just another UI. Any idea if MS is planning to merge the two forums? So I know that there's some initiatives to I think the short answer is yes. I do think that there's a plan to try and merge those communities together. Whether that means being able to cross post or kind of link to these different things. But I know this is something that I've heard Microsoft talk about. They don't like having kind of these two distinct areas. So I do think that that's something on the roadmap. I don't really know how quickly that's coming, but I do know that there's that having those communities kind of all be one big group is still having the separate areas for targeting those things, but seeing Dynamics as part of the Power Platform, I think is one of their goals. So I do think something like that might be coming. So that's the questions that we've got for now. So I'm going to jump into advanced developer techniques. And just a quick shout out to Oliver, who asked that last question. If you've ever asked a question on the forums, there's a good chance that Oliver has given you an answer. So he is extremely active on the forum. So shout out to him for giving lots of good questions, lots of good answers to questions. All right, so I've got kind of three topics here that I'm going to cover here in the advanced developer topics. Last month we covered Liquid, so I'm not really going to get into Liquid much. Spent a whole session on that. So if you do have, if you want to learn more about Liquid and you didn't get a chance to join last month, you can check out the video on YouTube. So what we're going to talk about today would be, we're going to talk about JavaScript, we're going to talk about companion apps, and then we'll get into the CRUD API. So JavaScript, like I mentioned with Liquid, JavaScript and Liquid are kind of the most common techniques for customizing Power Apps portals. You can add JavaScript to a lot of different places. I've got a blog post where I kind of cover a bunch of different places where you can do it, and I do give my recommendations about trying to kind of put it in the most specific and kind of reusable place as possible. So if you're interested in that, you can check that blog post out. But you can essentially add JavaScript, whether it's into HTML areas, so like content snippets, web templates, the copy attributes on web pages, or a lot of entities, web pages, entity forms, web forms, entity lists will have a custom JavaScript attribute as well. So you can put that, you can put your JavaScript directly in there. There's so many different things you can do once you're writing client-side JavaScript. And like I said, it's a very common technique and kind of the primary way that you can modify and kind of create some of your own custom user experiences is using JavaScript. In terms of the frameworks, I get asked quite often, can I use Angular? Can I use React? Just know that Power Apps Portals, the product itself, uses jQuery. And that is not something that you can get rid of. So just be aware that jQuery is there. You can bring in your own framework. So if you want to use Angular, or if you want to use React, or you want to use Vue, you can use those on your portal if you want to write that. But there's nothing kind of out of the box to do that. So you're responsible for, okay, how do I include those frameworks? Am I uploading them as web files? Am I referring to them from a CDN? All that sort of stuff kind of is your responsibility. But there's nothing, I'm aware of implementations that use Angular. I'm aware of implementations that use React and Vue, all those types of things. So it's certainly possible, but there's nothing kind of out of the box for portals that say, hey, check this box and you got Angular, or check this box, you got React. So that it becomes your responsibility. But again, keep in mind, jQuery exists. There's nothing you can do to remove jQuery. So just make sure that whatever you're doing is going to play nice with jQuery and not conflict. You don't have to use jQuery yourself, but it is going to exist on the page. So something to be aware of. Now, when it comes to using JavaScript, often you'll see it used on things like entity lists, entity forms, web forms. So the biggest thing to know is that there's no client-side SDK like there is with model-driven apps. So there's not like an XRM dot something namespace for you to interact with. Everything's kind of up to you to interact directly with the DOM. Again, because of the jQuery dependency that's built into portals, often you'll see examples using jQuery, but you don't have to. And the big thing is with entity lists or with entity forms and web forms is that the fields that show up on the page, the ID of those fields will match the logical names of those attributes. So that's kind of the big thing, is that you can target specific fields based on the ID of the fields from CDS. And you can interact with those elements directly. You know, something that you're not supposed to do in model-driven apps where you start doing DOM manipulation. That's something that's not such a no-no on portals. That's, you know, it's kind of the only option. Now, obviously, if you manipulate the DOM so much that it breaks things, well, you know that you're kind of on your own there. But I wouldn't say in the same way that it's unsupported to do direct DOM manipulation in a model-driven app. I wouldn't say that's the same on portals. Like direct DOM manipulation is something that is, you know, is allowable. And then when we look at things like entity lists, the key is that the portal's code includes, in almost all cases that I can think of, I think I've run into a couple places where there's some exceptions, but generally they're giving you IDs, consistent IDs or classes to allow you to target things and add your own elements. So, you know, a good example would be people want to add on an entity list their own custom actions for when you hit the dropdown. And so, you know, when you hit the dropdown on a list item, you know, you can do things like run workflows or edit the items, or, you know, there's a bunch of things you can add to the dropdown. Well, if there's something custom you want to do there, you know, it's pretty easy by just going into your browser developer tools and seeing, okay, what is the class that I can use to target those things? And again, that's something that is, you know, I wouldn't consider that to be unsupported. I don't know if you'll find any documentation for that, but by just using your browser tools, it's something that hasn't changed in years and years and years. And I wouldn't consider it bad practice to do that. There are a couple other JavaScript events that you can tie into. I know for entity lists, there's an event for when the grid loads. So there's things like that so that you can kind of properly handle client-side paging. So there are a few things like that that are documented in on the documentation site. So, but in general, what you're doing is, you know, when the page loads, you're attaching event handlers to certain things, or you're targeting specific IDs or classes that you're discovering by looking at the developer tools, and you're kind of adding your own logic there. So for example, a common technique that I use is if you have, say, a text box on your say you have a text box on your entity form and you want to make it, say it's a phone number. If you put an attribute that's just a text box, it's just going to be a plain text box. What if you want that to be more of a rich, a rich editor that does maybe auto formatting based on the country code and all that sort of stuff? The technique that I will often use is you take the original input that the entity form has placed on the page, you hide it, you replace it with your own control that, and then you can start using jQuery widgets, or, and that's when you can start using your widgets that are maybe already exist. You put that control on the page, and then you just make sure that you synchronize before the form is submitted. You copy the value from your control into the control that you've hidden, so that when you click submit, that data is included in the post back. So that again is a very common technique, is that you have an attribute on the page that ends up being hidden. You put a more sophisticated UI using client-side JavaScript, and then you just make sure that before they get submitted, that you're synchronizing that data back to the form. A very, very common question I get is, what about multi-select support on portals? And as of right now, there still is not, even though multi-select is an option in CDS, it is not supported on the portals. So I have a blog post, or I think a couple blog posts, where I provide a solution for doing that. And again, it uses JavaScript. It uses some plugins in the back end to kind of keep the multi-select up to date. But it's a similar technique where I've got an attribute, I replace it with a different interface. I use JavaScript to copy back to the right attribute, and it does work. And it's something that we do kind of all the time. So that kind of, very quickly here, that kind of covers what I wanted to talk about with JavaScript. Again, you're not going to find a ton of official documentation from Microsoft saying, here's the client-side SDK, because there isn't one. But really what you're kind of relying on is your ability to kind of sleuth around a little bit, use your developer tools, kind of poke around and see kind of what options are available, what classes are there. And that's kind of your techniques with JavaScript. All right, so now I'm going to move on to companion apps. So the first thing I want to say about companion apps is that companion apps themselves, it's a concept. It's not a feature that Microsoft gives you. It's not it's not any sort of standard. Here you go. Here's your companion app. It's more of a concept. It's an architecture that has become very popular with portals over the years because of our lack of ability to include any custom server-side code. So in short, what a companion app is a web service that you host. You can technically host it anywhere. You can host it on your own iron. If you got an on-premise iron, you want to put it on, you can technically do that. Performance-wise, what we recommend is that you put it in the same Azure data center as your portal. But again, that's a preference. It's not a hard requirement. So it's a web service that you host that you then interact with via AJAX calls in JavaScript on your portal. So all of the JavaScript you write directly on your portal, you include it in the custom JavaScript areas or however you decide to do that. But you can then make AJAX calls to your companion app and make whatever sort of calls you want. Now, since you host it yourself, you can do anything with it that you want. You can use it. You can use the CDS SDK to make calls back to Dynamics or CRM or CDS or whatever you want to call it. So if you want to interact with CDS data, you can certainly do that in your companion app. If you want to interact with data from a completely different system, you can do that. If you want to talk to other APIs, you can do that. The other thing is that you can write that in any language you want. You don't have to write it in .NET. You don't have to write in C# or VB or anything like that. Now, I've never written a companion app that wasn't in C#, but if you're a PHP whiz and that's what you want to use, there's nothing stopping you, because it is your own web service and you're responsible for both writing the web service and consuming it in the JavaScript on your portal. So it's really up to you to decide how you want to write your companion app. Now, when we get to the next slide, you'll see probably why you don't want to write it in a different language. But again, it's not a technical limitation. It's your web service. You do with it what you want. You're calling it from your portal. So that's kind of at a high level what a companion app is. Now, what's the tricky part about calling a companion app is the security. For the most part, you generally don't want your companion app to be a service that just anyone can call anonymously. Generally, there's some sort of authentication that you want to happen, and you also generally want to pass in the context of what user is making this call. So and of course you could do that by just passing a parameter of saying, hey, this is the ID of my contact, but that wouldn't be very secure. Someone could just start guessing IDs for contacts and passing that as a parameter, so that's not very secure. So back in the olden days, this was kind of a problem, because there was no one way to handle authentication from the portal. When you called the companion app, there was a known way that you could make it work with Azure AD B2C. I had kind of this crazy scheme that I could use for local authentication, but there was really no kind of standard way of sharing your authentication between your portal and your companion app. Thankfully, our life got a lot easier in 2019. In 2019, Microsoft put out the OAuth implicit grant flow support, which, long story short, what that means is the portal itself will now issue you a token. That token can then be passed to your companion app. That token can be validated from the companion app, and so your companion app can be assured that it is a legitimate token that was only issued to the authorized person. And one of the things that companion or that token contains is the ID of the contact making the call. So as long as you're passing that token, you can be assured that this is the person who is, this person is logged into the portal, and this is their contact ID. And so that token service works regardless of how you're authenticating. It even works with the deprecated local authentication. So it doesn't matter how you've logged into the portal. Once you've logged in, you can get that token from the portal, and you can then pass that to the companion app. And it's just kind of a one-size-fits-all solution that really makes our life a lot easier. Now, I do want to give a shout out to Colin Vermander. He wrote the original companion app starter template. I think it was called Dynamics Companion App, but what he really wanted to call it was Portal Buddy. I think he got overruled by the branding experts at Adoxio back in the day. So Portal Buddy, you can still find Portal Buddy out there. Portal Buddy, the original implementation was based on using Azure AD B2C. So there was kind of a single sign-on technique using the ADAL library where you could kind of share the authentication. But again, if you were using something other than Azure AD B2C, it didn't quite work. Now, the kind of the secret about this is that token service that Microsoft released in 2019 has actually been there for quite a long time. It's probably been there since at least, I think, 2016, but it was never documented. What it was is that CafeX had their kind of live assist kind of chat bot implementation that required that functionality. So it was kind of there. It was again, it was never documented, so it never would have been kind of officially supported to use it. So Colin does have a branch of Portal Buddy that works against that service as well. But I'll show you, there's another way that you can kind of get quickly going with the companion app if this is a technique that you're interested in. But again, Colin Vermander, I would call him the godfather of companion apps. So he's got a lot of great resources on companion apps, including his Portal Buddy starter template, which is what we used as our starter template for years and years. So what I wanted to do next here was just kind of jump over to the Microsoft documentation and dive a little bit more into how authentication works and kind of how a companion app would look. So I'm going to bring up here on my screen. So here is the documentation on the OAuth implicit grant flow, which is what we're talking about with the authentication. So you can see that there are two different endpoints. There's an authorized endpoint as well as a token endpoint. I'm not going to get too much into the details of the difference between the two, mostly because I don't fully understand. I understand the difference, but I don't really get why people would use the authorized. The token one seems to be, that's the one that I like to use, where you make a call, it gets you a token, away you go. And you can see here they've got good documentation on here's the URL to call to get your token. But more importantly, they've got sample code, and that's what I kind of wanted to quickly walk through here. So you can see here they've got 3 sets of sample code. What we'll talk about is this code here and this code. So this code right here, the portal OAuth token with external web API, this is essentially a companion app starter template. So this is the server-side code that you can write that would be your companion app. And so that includes, and the big thing about that is they've included the code so that you can consume the token that's being passed to you and validate that token. So that's really kind of what's great about that starter template, is that it's already figured out how to accept the token and ensure that the token is valid. And then the other here, the token endpoint sample, what that is it's the code that you need on the portal side. So it's the JavaScript that you need to get your token and then you can then pass that on to your web service or to your companion app. So that's why there's kind of two sides to this. One is the companion app itself, and the other is the code that you need in order to retrieve the token and then pass that to your companion app. So the first thing I want to do is just quickly take a peek at the companion app starter template. Now, one thing that's different about Colin's Portal Buddy starter template is that Colin's starter template also includes the code to connect back to your CDS instance. So, a lot of times your companion apps were calling back to CDS. So his code includes configuration that gets you your organization service for calling back to the CRM APIs. This companion app doesn't do that. So it is just really meant for handling authentication. So what I want to point out is if we go into the app start and then go into the startup CS class, you'll see in here that all we're doing is when this app starts up, we're registering an OAuth bearer authentication options. And you can see that we're registering a custom one that we'll see down here, which is the Dynamics Portals bearer authentication provider. So again, this is the companion apps code that accepts the token and validates the token and sets up kind of the authentication piece. If we look at the actual Dynamics Portal bearer authentication provider code, the main code here is the validate identity. So the way this works is that you pass in the token on using the authentication header. So you can see right here is the authorization header. So with it, when we see how we actually generate the token, we'll then take that token, we'll pass it in on the authorization header, and the standard format is to say bearer and then a space and then your token. So you can see what this code is doing is it's just retrieving the actual token from the authorization header. It's then taking that token. Now, the thing to understand about tokens is that those tokens are not encrypted. They're encoded so that if you look at them, you won't, to the plain eye, you won't see what's in those tokens, but they're not encrypted in any way. What they are is they include a hash that allows you to verify that they come from the right place. But just know that when you look at a token, you can easily decode that token and see what's in there. So the validation of it happens here. So you can see here that we get our token, we then pass that into the we then can get the claims that are part of that, and then the important part here is that we can also verify the tokens. So here, that's part of this load signing key. So what happens is the token is signed by a private key on the portal, and then you can validate or you can verify that it is a valid token by getting the public key from the portal. So you can see that that's what's happening here, is that they're just doing a download string from this known URL from your portal to get the public key, and that's what's used. That's what's being used to validate the public, to validate the token. So that's kind of happening all in this code. So it's not a ton of code. We're under a couple hundred lines of code for this whole area, but if you've never done this before, to get to these couple hundred lines of code probably would take you a lot longer than you'd like. So that's what I really love about the starter portal is that the hard work is taken care of for you here. So so what I want to do is I want to show you is last night what I did is I generated a token and I grabbed that token. So this is the token. If you were to generate a token, this is what you would see. You would see all this stuff over here. This bunch of gobbledygook. I believe it's probably base 64 encoded somehow. But what I've gone is I've gone to jwt.io, so this JSON web token, and what this does is this decodes it. Now again, this isn't decrypting it. I haven't given it any sort of public or private key to decrypt it. This is all just being decoded. And what's important is that within this web or within this token, you can see in here, it will actually fill in your first name, your last name. It'll give you your email. The contact record I did this for just happened to have a blank first and last name. It will give you the email address, but the most important thing that it gives you is the ID of the contact. It actually gives it to you in a couple places. You'll see that within these claims in here, we've got the ID of the contact right here, but you also see the sub right here. This is also that same ID. So in a couple different places with that token, we've got the ID of the contact, and that's really what we care about. So if I jump back here to, I'm just going to show you. So once they here, we get the token, we then validate the token to make sure that someone hasn't just created it, because again, I could take this and I could just kind of copy and paste it and kind of use a replay attack to get in. Obviously, these tokens expire, so that's one of the protections against that. But once we validate it, you can see that we then set up the claim. So we set up the authenticated user so that throughout the rest of our application, all we do is we go in and say what user is authenticated, and we can get those details. So you can see here, we just say context.response.context.application.user. We set that to be the identity that we've gathered from that token. And now, if I go back here, now the actual API that you'd be calling, that's in your controller. So within your controller, here's your external web API controller. So here is that request. You can see this is where you'd put in your logic. You can see what it's doing here is it's going into the claim, or into the user who's currently authenticated. It's going into those claims and it's pulling out some of that claim information. So whether it's the name, the email, or like I said, most importantly, customer ID. Also their username. But what I find in practice is the most important thing is we care about what is the ID of the contact, and that's what we're using in our companion app logic. The other thing to know about companion apps is that they don't do any sort of enforcement of entity permissions. You're responsible for all of the security around your companion app. So when you're calling your companion app, you got to make sure that the person who's calling it, so now you know how to get their contact ID, but you got to make sure that do they have the authority to, even though they're logged in, yes, they may be a valid user, but do they have the rights to do the operation that you're performing? You're responsible for doing all that logic yourself. The other thing that's important to note is that there's something called CORS, which is cross-origin resource sharing. It's pretty easy to set up these days, but back in the day, it wasn't actually possible. If you had, JavaScript on your portal that made a call to a service that was hosted on a different domain, which, it's guaranteed because even if it was a subdomain, you weren't allowed to call a web service on a different domain. That is now kind of an accepted way of doing things. But what you do have to do is you do have to set up CORS, so CORS, cross-origin resource sharing. You do have to make sure that you're setting that up on your companion app. The way that it works is that the browser, before letting you call an external API, it sends a quick request to that API saying, am I allowed to call you? And you have to configure your companion app to allow CORS requests. I believe that this app does have some CORS support in it as well. So just something to be aware of if you're getting rejected requests and maybe you haven't set up CORS properly. And then I'll quickly jump over to the, there it is. So the token endpoint. So this is a sample code that they have for retrieving a token. Again, it's not a lot going on here. There's just essentially a simple URL that you call. Oh no, is this the authorized? Sorry, this is the authorized endpoint. I'm gonna jump into, yeah, sorry, here's the token endpoint. So it's a simple kind of AJAX call to the token endpoint. The result that you'll get back here in the data is the token, and then any request that you make to your companion app, you just simply include that token in the authorization header, prepended with the bearer. So you're basically passing the bearer token. So this is the code to get to your token, and then kind of it's your responsibility to take that token and then include that as a header on your request over to your companion app. Looks like Eugene has posted an updated version of. He's got an updated version of the companion app, so I'm definitely gonna take a look, see what that is. But so that is, I know we're at 1:45 here, or 1:45 for me. It's a quarter. We've got about 15 minutes left here, and I do want to talk about the CRUD Web API. So if there are any other questions about companion apps, that's a really quick intro about, again, once you've got your web app working, you're just into regular ASP.NET development. You can call CDS APIs if you want to. You can call other APIs. You're now responsible for writing the web service yourself. Really, the tricky part is that authentication. So that's why I want to kind of cover that. All right. So now I'm going to jump back to my presentation, and we're going to talk about the CRUD Web API. So the first thing, I do want to thank the Portals team, specifically Dilip and Niraj, for allowing me to share some of these details that were not kind of publicly available up until this point. But in order to do that, I made a few promises. So the first one is, and I want to emphasize this, that the things I'm sharing today are when this does come out, and I think it's right now supposed to go public preview in June. Public preview means that nothing is kind of set in stone. It's a work in progress. That's even more true. The fact that we're in advance of the preview, anything that I've mentioned today, don't hold anyone to anything. It's really, they're doing us a favor by giving us kind of a sneak peek. But you can't really hold anyone. You can't hold Microsoft. You can't hold me to anything that I'm about to say here. So it is very much still in preview. That kind of legal stuff aside, what they've got coming for us is, we got our first kind of look at it a couple of weeks ago, and the main takeaway is that the CRUD API is going to feel very similar to the web API that exists for CDS already. So what's going to be coming as part of the June preview is you will be able to call the API to create, update, or delete entities through the web API. And again, it will look and feel very similar to how the web API for CDS works right now. So that means it's an OData REST-based service where you're passing JSON in and you're getting JSON back with the results of your query. So there'll be some sort of specific URL that you'll make there'll be kind of a base path for the API, and you'll be making your calls for, again, create, update, and delete is what's going to be included as part of this first release. They do intend at some point on having read permissions, but since that's already possible right now with Liquid, it was kind of a lower priority item. And same with doing any sort of filtering or queries. None of that will be part of this first release because, again, those capabilities already exist. You can do that with Liquid. You can do your queries that way. So the first kind of thing that you will see here in June will be the ability to create, update, delete entities, and that includes kind of setting relationships. So you can set lookups, that sort of thing. And again, it will feel very much like the web API that currently exists. So OData, REST-based. So you're going to be doing your HTTP verbs. So delete will delete things. You'll do your posts or your puts or your merges, all those types of things for doing that sort of stuff. So it'll be an OData type REST-based service. Now the configuration of it, so it will enforce entity permissions. So in order for anyone to do anything, that user will have to have the entity permissions. But there are additional things that will be able to be configured via site settings to provide an extra layer on top. Because just because you want to give someone the ability to, say, submit a form doesn't necessarily mean you want to open up an API for them to do something similar. So you do have to explicitly enable this web API. So that's, for example, you have to say this entity is enabled for the web API. Even if someone has entity permissions, if there's not a specific setting that says here's this entity is enabled for the web API, it won't work. Plus, there is by field as well. So you can say, I want to enable it for all fields, but you can also just say, hey, on the contact record, only the first and the last name can be updated through the API. So again, there's kind of a first layer, which is entity permissions. Without entity permissions, nothing's going to work. And then there's another layer on top of that where you can have more fine-grained control over the web API specifically. As I mentioned, it is scheduled to go into public preview in June. Again, it's just for create, update, and delete of entities. So things like querying, also other things like calling actions and functions. While that is on the longer term roadmap, this is not going to be, right away. You're not going to be able to, kick off workflows or call actions or call functions like, who am I or that sort of thing. So the first iteration is going to be specifically targeted at creating, updating, and deleting entities with the enforcement of entity permissions. And that's kind of it. It's when they release the documentation on it, I think it'll be kind of pretty straightforward. If you've used the web API already, you're going to be able to, it's going to be pretty quick to create entities. It's going to open up a whole new world of things that we're going to be able to do without a companion app. It'll get rid of a lot of companion apps that we've had to write previously. If your companion app was just there to interact with CDS, there's a good chance you can get rid of it and do this. So the approach that I am taking for the companion apps going forward is I'm always modeling my interactions as much as possible so that it would be easy to replace these companion apps with this CRUD API going forward. So that is, instead of writing larger complex functions within a companion app, if you take an approach of writing out more OData type services in your companion app, that is going to make your transition to using the CRUD API that much easier, because it could get to the point where you're just kind of changing the endpoint and away you go. If instead you're writing, if you're putting all of your logic into your companion app and your kind of higher level function in your companion app, then you might be kind of sticking with the companion app because those higher level functions are not going to be available through something like the web API. So yeah, so that's what I wanted to cover, and that's what I've been authorized to share. I'm not seeing, are there any questions about that? I'm not seeing any questions right now. So I will just kind of finish up with the rest of the presentation here, but if there are any questions, please do put those in the questions and I'll take care of that. In terms of our next call, we've got our next call scheduled for June 18th at this same time, 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 12 p.m. Pacific. I believe that's 7 p.m. UTC. If you do have any questions about or any suggestions for topics for next month, please do that. I don't really have one in mind quite yet, so certainly open to suggestions. Again, thank you to Jason and the folks at MS Dynamics World. And just looking here, it looks like we've got a question. So would the CRUD require auth? If I recall correctly, so it will require auth, but if I had to guess, it's probably just going to use the same token that we were talking about for the companion app. So it won't, because I don't believe there'll be any opportunity to use the CRUD API for anonymous users. Although, to be honest, I don't know if anyone really asked about that. So I could see that there might be a potential use case for having anonymous. You can create entity permissions for people. So I don't actually know if anonymous users will be there, but I'm pretty sure that there's going to be some sort of token that you have to pass as part of your request there. But I think it'll be, if it's not the same service as the one that already exists for the companion app, it'll be something very similar. All right. I don't see any other questions here. We've got a couple more minutes so we can hang out. But otherwise, again, thanks to everyone for taking the time to hang out with us today and talk portals. Again, reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter or any of those other forums if you've got any questions. Otherwise, I think that's it for today. Oh, we do have another question. Not really a question, but I do like the portal action idea with the plugin on the retrieve multiple requests. I have that in a few projects and find it very stable. All right, well, Oliver, so what he's talking about is the putting a plugin on retrieve multiple. I would just say that Microsoft doesn't love that solution, especially the folks over at Fast Track. It's certainly something that they're aware of. It's something that back in the day, the way I discovered it is that it was included in the events portal. So the thing is that the events portal wasn't really developed by the portal product team. So the portal product team does not love that technique. I guess I'll just kind of leave it at that. But I find that on small implementations, it can sometimes save you the trouble of a companion app. I think that once we've got the CRUD API, a lot of those use cases will probably disappear for that technique. But yeah, if people are interested in reading more about it, I believe the blog post I have on that topic is called Hacking Your Way to Server-Side Code, just like Microsoft, which was probably a poor choice of title for an aspiring MVP. All right, I think that's it. Jason, anything else that you wanted to mention before we wrap this up?
Only that we will be sending out a link to today's session as a recording and a link to next month's event.
That's right. So yeah, please let me know if you have any topics for next month. And I don't see any other questions, so I think we'll wrap it up there.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, we'll wrap it up there. Have a good day, everyone.